American Public Media.
Citizens Property Insurance. Whether recovering or preparing, Citizens is available. Claims can be tracked at citizensfla.com or reported by calling a live Citizens representative. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, dangerous levels of lead and cancer-causing materials have been found in hair products marketed to Black women. We talk about the emerging science of cosmetic hazards. Then, we talk to the people behind the transformation of the 112-year-old Union Terminal warehouse into the East Side's newest residential address. And turning literary landscapes into tangible ones. We talk to the artist behind an upcoming tutorial. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The Israeli military says its air assault on Gaza is ongoing. Airstrikes started overnight, and health authorities in Gaza say the Israeli strikes have killed at least 400 Palestinians. At least 560 others have been wounded. Israel says it is targeting terrorist cells and infrastructure. NPR's Kat Lonsdorf has more.
NPR's producer in Gaza, Anas Baba, stood in the courtyard of the Al-Ahli Hospital in Gaza City, the only fully functioning hospital in the north, where scores of bodies were laid out following the strikes.
Women and children, entire families lay dead in front of me here. The smell of blood mixed with gunpowder and burning flesh is returned once more in Gaza.
He says people are in shock at the sudden return of war. The strikes come after a relatively quiet several weeks, as Palestinians in Gaza had tried to start picking up the pieces after more than 15 months of war. The Israeli military has told residents from several neighborhoods to evacuate immediately, saying that Israel has, quote, launched a strong offensive against terrorist organizations. Kat Lonsdorf, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
In the U.S., a former Columbia University graduate student is asking a federal judge to be released from custody. Mahmoud Khalil is being detained in Louisiana. NPR's Adrian Florido reports the Trump administration is trying to strip Khalil of his green card and deport him over his pro-Palestinian activism.
Immigration agents arrested Mahmoud Khalil at his Manhattan apartment building on March 8th and flew him to Louisiana the next day. The government is resisting his lawyer's attempts to have him returned to New York. He wants to be released from custody while he fights deportation. Khalil's wife is pregnant with their first child and expects to give birth next month. The petition filed by his legal team also asks the federal court to temporarily block the Trump administration from arresting anyone else for deportation because of their pro-Palestinian activism or for protesting Israel and its military operation in Gaza. Adrian Florido, NPR News, New York.
President Trump is scheduled to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin by phone this morning. Trump has been urging Russia and Ukraine to end the war 3 years after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine has agreed to a 30-day truce, but NPR's Charles Maines reports before Russia will agree to a specific truce, Putin has set several conditions.
That Ukraine give up territory annexed by Moscow and end its ambitions to join NATO. I put the question of what, if anything, the Kremlin was giving up to Sergei Markov. He's a former Putin spokesman. His answer, a promise not to seize more Ukrainian territory. That is the concession. If there are any concessions from Putin, they appear to be aimed at Trump. Putin is essentially offering Trump business opportunities, everything from rare earth minerals to investments if and when sanctions are lifted.
NPR's Charles Maines reporting. On Wall Street in pre-market trading, Dow futures are lower. This is NPR.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning, I'm Stephen Ponson. It's now 9:04. Elderly and low-income people in Nassau County now have access to free and reduced-fee legal services. WJCT News 89.9's Michelle Corum reports.
The new Nassau County Legal Aid Office in Fernandina Beach is an arm of the nonprofit Jacksonville Area Legal Aid, or JALA. Its lawyers can provide help for everything from wills and elder abuse to consumer issues like debt collection and scams. The legal assistance is available by appointment only at both the Fernandina Beach Senior Life Center and the Westside Senior Life Center. Nassau County residents who need legal advice can go to jackslegalaid.org/apply. Michelle Corum, WJCT News 89.9.
The public is invited to honor those who served in the Vietnam War at a ceremony next Thursday, March 27th, at the Jacksonville National Cemetery on Lanny Road. The event begins at 9:30 that morning. It includes a keynote speech from a Vietnam War veteran and a wreath-laying ceremony. Veterans Administration staff will also be on hand to answer questions. It's going to be a beautiful day here, and we're going to have a nice stretch of weather for the next couple of days here in Northeast Florida. Sunny skies this afternoon with temperatures reaching the lower 70s inland and upper 60s closer to the coast. Winds will be light today as well. Sunny skies tomorrow afternoon with highs in the lower 80s, and rain is in the forecast on Thursday morning.
Support for NPR comes from the Skoll Foundation, dedicated to powering social innovators to transform the world. Learn more at skoll.org. And Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, the emerging science of chemical hazards in the beauty industry. We discuss new research raising concerns about potential links between cosmetics and cancer. Later, the city's newest live-work project that Eastside residents hope is a catalyst for change. But first, a recent study was just the latest showing the presence of carcinogens in ordinary hair products often marketed to Black women. Here to discuss the study and its implications, I'm joined by Dr. Lorraine Brown, Medical Director at UF Women's Health, who also teaches obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Florida College of Medicine. Welcome back, Dr. Brown.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Dr. Kim Barbell-Johnson, Director of Community Clinical Trials Administration at Mayo Clinic's Comprehensive Cancer Center. Welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Johnson, what specifically did this most recent study uncover?
So the study actually was recently published and has gotten a lot of media attention as it studied synthetic hair products, braiding hair, as we know it in the Black hair consumer community. And what they did was they looked at popular brands of braiding hair and evaluated that hair for the types of things that we know that could be cancer causing. And in doing so, they tested it by various methodologies, looking at the products of the hair and then what happens when you heat the hair or boil the hair, and see if there were detectable levels of things like lead and other what we call volatile organic compounds that were detected. And in the results were not inconsistent with previous studies that these hair products contain concerning chemicals. And the further concern is that those chemicals can be absorbed through the scalp or be emitted into the environment and cause illness in those who are using it or those who are using the products for extended periods of time. And so the study actually, once again, continued the signs that we've been looking at actually for more than a decade about concerning some unregulated aspects of products within hair products, cosmetic products that are geared to more vulnerable populations like Black women and Afro-Latinx community. And so it has now sparked this incredible conversation about who's responsible for making sure that these products are regulated, or that the consumer is aware, or that the person who is providing the service is adequately providing information to the client who's getting this, and which is more, and Dr. Brown can really speak to this as we're thinking about here, particularly as a culture of people of color, where hair is so important in how we express ourselves, how we historically have identified. Are there things that we can do to change the narrative about how we actually prepare and groom our hair, and can we do things so that we don't put uh, those who are most vulnerable among the vulnerable, like our children, like babies in utero, at more risk? And so, can we continue this conversation? Can we support the science that adds to this information, so that we have specific information that we can use to both steer policy and create policy, and which is more protect patients, protect people.
And I just want to drill down a little bit on the findings so that we're clear on what this specifically found. The report, the Consumer Reports, they tested 10 very popular brands of this braiding hair. They found carcinogens in 100% of the synthetic braiding hair samples that they tested. They found lead in 9 of the 10 products. They found, as you mentioned, volatile organic compounds, again, detected in all products. And 3 of them contained benzene, which is a known carcinogen that actually causes a kind of leukemia. Dr. Brown, first of all, tell us a little bit about what the presence of these means and the concerns about exposure.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So you broke it down into the 3 specific types of potentially dangerous chemicals that they were really kind of eyeing in this study. And first, we can talk about the carcinogens. As you mentioned, they were detected in 100% of the samples. And carcinogens, it's a big fancy word for essentially chemicals that may cause cancer. While there is a spectrum of the different chemicals that they found in the hair products that were analyzed, as you mentioned, some are known carcinogens, while some may have that possibility or that linkage. So that's an important distinction. But of those chemicals that are known, as you mentioned, that is a very, very concerning feature. And the cancer, the type of cancer that you mentioned, it's acute myeloid leukemia, which is a blood cancer. And that's very, very concerning if we know that that chemical is known to cause cancer and it was detected in those hair samples. The other 2 categories of the harmful chemicals that were noted was lead, and that was present in 9 of the 10 products. As we all know, historically, lead has been found in paint, in construction materials, and to find that product, as Dr. Barbell Johnson mentioned, in hair products that can cause immediate skin irritation or be emitted into the and inhaled into the atmosphere, that can be very concerning. And we can talk later about some of the specific health concerns with regards to lead. And the volatile organic compounds, so all of us need to reach back into organic chemistry.
Right.
But essentially, those are compounds that can be released into the atmosphere. So in many of our traditions and in salons, there is a great deal of preparation to kind of finish the product. It's braiding, but it's also sealing the ends of the hair and maybe boiling the hair. So you can release some of the products that have been embedded in those hair strands, and that can cause further problems. Acetone is one of the big ones that, when inhaled, the American Lung Association has very clear recommendations for that, and it's very well studied that inhalation of that can be harmful over long periods of time.
And so that would be a concern, as you say, treating the braids sometimes to prevent them from unraveling or to make sure that they attach properly. So if you're heating this product and it is emitting these things, that's not just necessarily a hazard for somebody who's wearing them, but for the person that is perhaps using these products every day in their work.
Yes, definitely. And that's an important distinction, not only for the consumer who is getting the hairstyle, and you have, just as Dr. Bell Johnson mentioned, that immediate contact with the skin or scalp, that's very important, but also the prolonged wearing of braids. So, typically we invest a lot of time and money into these hairstyles so we can keep our hair clean and continue to wear the style for weeks sometimes. So that there's a prolonged exposure there. And then the inhalation risk as well.
And in terms of lead exposure, we do know that there is not a federal limit on lead. It's not regulated in that way, but it is known at almost any level to cause a variety of problems for people. It can cause reproductive issues, it can cause um, nervous system and immune issues, but it's particularly concerning, I believe, with children. So, talk about that if you can, Dr. Barbell Johnson, about children, because sometimes very young kids are getting the hair braided.
Absolutely. And so you're correct. There's absolutely no good level of lead. And so while we have growing evidence for other chemicals, acetone, formaldehyde releasing products, other things that you will read in the science, lead is across the board. We are absolutely clear that there's no good level for exposure. And so having any level of lead present should be disclosed, number one, and we should know about that so that we can govern those risks. And like you mentioned, we call these protective hairstyles. And so we, as moms, I have a daughter, I have nieces, I have done my own hair for a long time, and it's hard with making kind of decisions about what you do with hair. And sometimes we often use products and I don't often turn the label around on a hair product and read the ingredients. So there are two things. One, is lead present? Would we be able to recognize that there is lead or some other concerning chemical in a product when we purchase the products to use? And so there's a concern that there may be hidden levels of lead that's unregulated. But even if we were to label it in some way, are we informing the consumer? Are we informing the moms that this may have some deleterious impact on their child or on an unborn fetus? So there's a lot of education that we must continue to do in this space. And why? Why? Because of all the things that we've talked about, the neurological impact of these, not only lead, but some of these other toxins that we're talking about. And especially for kids, because as we know in science, especially with pediatric cancers, it's not the most funded area of research. And so we must be really aggressive and very proactive in protecting that voiceless community, number one. Number two, there's that concern with being able to understand what's going to happen long term. And so oftentimes studies are needed for decades in order to see the longitudinal impact of something. And sometimes that requires a lot of resources to go the long haul. And so we have some really great, studies that are happening in populations of color, but those are longitudinal studies, and we really need the test of time to show those impacts. And unfortunately, by the time we have the hard science to show those things factually, the damage has already been done. Mm-hmm. So if we know better, we should do better, as we know about lead. And we have a long way to go across all fronts, both from the regulatory point of view, from the educating of the occupational risks to those who are doing the styling, whether you're a professional, occupational hairstylist or a mom, as we inform our parents about risk to anything that we're using, from nutrition to hair products, and how that might impact. And, they're often very silent things that, are happening in this space. And so we don't necessarily connect the dots as this has caused that. And so the science actually still needs to be more clear that the presence of these products, as the study revealed, is it truly causative? Is it causative at a certain level that's detected? Do we have the science to say that in that population, this level is the level that we should cut off and be concerned about? Do we have the presence of people of color in these studies that would suggest that the level maybe should be lower, to be of concern? And then is it synergistic? Is it the presence of the product mixed with the genetics of the person, mixed with the environmental exposure. And so it's very complex and complicated as you look at this space. And so while we know lots about lead, we know lots about formaldehyde releasing products, we know about those 11 or 12 FDA regulated products, and we're able to quantify those things. There's still a long way that we must go. When we look at this country, we must also realize that we're part of a global community. And so in this country, we've regulated a handful compared to the European countries that over 1,000 products are banned from cosmetic and hair products. And yet they're banned for use in their countries, but not banned for use in this country. So they can still manufacture products and export them to countries such as ours. And because they're not banned in our country, we can use them. So it becomes a very complex and complicated topic. And that's why these types of forums, your show, for example, is extremely important, because it allows us to get the message of let's think about it, let's talk about it out to those who are most at risk in our community.
And we should be clear about a couple of things. I mean, none of these things were listed on the ingredients. They're not required to be listed. If something like a VOC, a volatile organic compound, is released, they're not required to say that. Things like fragrance don't have to include what they contain. So there's a lot of ways that things can be in a product and a customer wouldn't know. But if you're just joining us, we were talking about new research into beauty products and concerns about what they contain, including carcinogens. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. We have a call from Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Go ahead.
Good morning. It is very distressing. I saw this study recently. I know of 8 people that have cancer, 2 ovarian, 4 or 5 multiple myeloma, which seems to be very prevalent in African-American people, women right now, in case you didn't know. A lot of women went to protective styles because they found out that in the relaxers, which had lye, was, a endocrine disruptor and could cause cancer. I just find it very telling, not odd, that in America we're the guinea pigs, and there's no reason for lead to be in a hair product. Let's just be clear. I know you want to be very scientifically careful, but lead there's no reason that there should be lead in anything attached to my body. So I just feel like we're the guinea pigs in America. We have very loose regulations compared to European Union, and I just think that people are now, I'm going to say causative, you can't. There seems to be a direct correlation of products that can be used. So when we got rid of the lye because they were killing us from cancer, they decided to put it in the hair products that we were using to protect our lives. So I don't think that's a coincidence, but I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist early this morning. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Linda. Your thoughts about that, Dr. Brown?
Yeah, that's very interesting and a common theme among people in our communities. I think one thing that we haven't discussed yet is how much of a big business hair products and cosmetics products are, especially when we are discussing the synthetic hair products that are known to be potentially harmful at this point. African American women and women of African descent are the primary utilizers of these hair products. And in 2023, the U.S. share of that market was $2.7 billion. But in 2029, it's projected to be over $6 billion. So by any means, if a company can get that margin a little bit better, and like Dr. Barbara Johnson said, synthetic hair products are not very expensive. So you can imagine the volume of usage that occurs in our communities. And it's just very interesting how there's such loose regulations on these things. And it was also eye-opening from the Consumer Reports study. They contacted all 10 companies of the different hair products. Only 2 companies responded, obviously voluntary. One company actually stated that they know what products they use in their manufacturing, but they can't vouch for the other products that are used to maintain the when they're storing the products or the finishing touches essentially on those products. So this opens an entire can of worms about the accountability of these companies to the safety of the products that they're selling, both from a consumer standpoint and then just from an ethical standpoint. They, like you said, they have no obligation to list out all of the products, much less what effects those products can have. So, California actually, has some state regulations surrounding lead. So there is some push to include more disclosure, but it would be ideal because just like our caller mentioned, it's lots of cancer, lots of endocrine disorders. So endocrine disorders surrounding hormonal issues, female reproductive disorders, disorders of childbirth or pregnancy. So it's far reaching. The studies, like Dr. Bell Johnson said, are going to be lagging because some of these effects we won't recognize until 5, 10, 15 years after the exposure. And then it's multifactorial. Your own predisposition to cancer, but how it interacts with these substances is going to be ideal to understand.
It's probably worth noting that, some of these products that are used are part of beauty standards that have been, basically dictated by society or imposed on women. Women wearing natural hair until very recently was prohibited in places like the military service. So, use of products like a relaxer or a braid in some ways is used by Black women in order to occupy spaces that they wouldn't maybe be welcome in if they were feeling like outsiders or perhaps not, falling into line with some sort of expectation.
Absolutely. There are such systemic parts of this conversation that it's probably owed its own discussion and own show. And while we are talking about hair, you are absolutely correct, not only about hair and presence, but executive presence, involves cosmetic use. I also wanted to say that this is a wonderful topic as we talk about synthetic hair. There are other hair products that we purchase, and so it's important to also recognize that while we're a long way from regulation, there are choices that we can have. Unfortunately, as we've seen in previous models, like with tobacco and other products that have been marketed, that research dynamics have allowed us to see the research where certain communities are actually targeted. Synthetic products, synthetic hair is cheaper than natural hair or human hair. And so the economic aspect of making that choice, the choice between looking good and having a cheaper product, it is not a conspiracy theory. It really is a marketing design, right? And so we have to accept that it is what it is. And so then we have to decide, how do we actually empower? How do we create not only rules and regulations, but how do we empower and give a sense of agency to the women to have these choices and to change that narrative altogether? And so I don't disagree with the caller whatsoever. In fact, I think we're all on the same page, and I do appreciate the caller's concern. I also wanted to add, though, that a lot of what we know, the temporal association, the timing, we've seen this. We've been watching this play out in the science. And so while it may hit the airways, and this recent study has brought it back to the conversation, if you look through the medical literature, this is not a new concern. And so I think it's about exactly what we're doing. It's about, once we know it, how do we create space and in conversations for this, and how do we trust the Dr. Browns and the Dr. Barbell Johnsons and create more Dr. Browns and Dr. Barbell Johnsons, so that we're at the table as we're making these decisions in regulatory spaces and medical spaces and in political spaces. And I think that is what is also part of this conversation.
It's interesting to that point. I know that Spelman College recently became the first HBCU to launch a cosmetic science program specifically to address these kinds of issues and those disparities. We have a call from Nancy in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Nancy. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ann. I want to say good morning also to Dr. Barbell Johnson. This is Nancy, who sends hearts to Joshua every time his picture is on, on
One of
Facebook.
our favorite artists and dance school executives here, and nice to talk to you.
Yes, you too, honey. Okay, my question is, Dr. Brown talked about getting the information current in all these executive meetings and that are happening. But my question is, I'm thinking of the young women that I work with. How do we get the message to them? How this call is? This talk is frustrating and fascinating. But what do I do? Okay, I'm not. I am not a black woman, but I want to know how to get this message across. And I'll take my answer off the line.
That's an interesting question, and one I think that probably is a communication that you'd want to handle with a lot of care.
I think it's extremely, it's an incredible question. And, there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think Nancy actually brings up the point that this is not a black or brown conversation. It's an all of us conversation, because health disparities that result impact all of us. The messaging is not just for those who who look like the consumer. The messaging is for all of us who care about the welfare of people and humanity. And so what can we do? We can reach people where they are. The sensitivity, it's not to be judgmental in any space, because people have choice, right? And it's to make sure that we have all of the information that's available to those who are making those choices, so that they can make informed decisions. As you make informed decisions, you as my dad used to say, you sleep in the bed that you make, right? So, but we must make sure that there are choices and that there's information. As we look to our community, we must continue to have maybe not about the hair care product, but let's talk about the increased incidence of cancer in younger people that we don't quite understand. Let's talk about endometrial cancer. Let's talk about fibroids. Let's talk about the things that we actually will probably be more likely to listen to and be at least emotionally connected to, because I think that when you look at the root cause analysis, then we can get to the conversations about all of the things that might be contributing to that. And then we can ask, what are we doing to be part of that conversation and that science? It will help us to get to why we need to be part of clinical trials. It will get us to conversations about the American Cancer Society's Voices study, why those who can be in that study by age inclusion should be part of a simple way to contribute to this information. Real world evidence in real studies. The information that we have from things like the Boston studies, and the largest studies of 56,000 women, 40,000 women, came because those women of color chose to be part of trials, and that's how we were able to get information. So let's start with the things that we can do, as well as other things that we are concerned about.
I want to take a call from Stanley on the north side. Good morning, Stanley. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, especially Anna. I'm with the African American Economic Recovery Think Tank. We've been dealing with this issue since 1980, when we saw the change in African American women. Because this issue is deeper than this. What's appalling to me, and I'm a master researcher, that this issue in the African American community, when it comes to these products, has been going on, like I say, since 1980. And it's really for the community to come together and address it. This is a crisis. That's why we've been seeing so many problems when it comes to African American women. Their mental condition because of those products. And I have the data to back it up. Thank you.
Thanks, Stanley. To his point, some of these things, the science has been around for many years. I can recall the documentary from 2009 that Chris Rock did, where he was showing the impacts of a soda can inside sodium hydroxide, which was at the time very common in relaxers. But, even formaldehyde, which has been shown to be a very hazardous chemical that is contained in some of these products, there's been calls, there's been regulatory demands that it be removed, and it still hasn't been regulated.
Right, right. I think that approaching it from the standpoint of this is going to be a ground up effort is going to be what's most advantageous. And I applaud you, Mr. Stanley, for working in the community to try to ameliorate some of these issues. And I would give credence to our younger generations, as Dr. Barbell Johnson mentioned a little bit earlier. There's been systemic challenges to what is determined to be neat or professional. So that kind of crafted some of the decisions that Black women had to make as we integrated into professional circles, or just the idea of what it meant to be neat. So that, like he mentioned, probably in the late 70s, early 80s, people sort of opened their eyes to a more natural movement. And I feel that our younger generation, and my daughter's going to Spelman College in August, they can take this and run with it. They have been able to craft different norms. And me and Dr. Barbell Johnson are not even that old, but when we did our medical training, the acceptance of different what professional hairstyles meant has morphed over the last, several decades. So I'm hopeful that with standardized educational programs dedicated to looking at these disparities within the cosmetic industry, and large volumes of young people who are social media influencers, or just getting that grassroots word out about a more natural approach to cosmetics and hair care, can be the spark that we need within our own community, because trust is a huge issue. So once we can kind of spread that information and plant advocates within the community who can bring that scientific information, and we have cost-effective alternatives or just options to how we deem we can feel beautiful yet be safe, I think that's probably going to be one direction we can take.
So agree. I'm from the Caribbean, so the standard of beauty was different. Having locks and having natural hair was something that was beautiful in my culture. Yet I ironed or hot combed, or whatever the current terminology is, my hair every Sunday after the beach. I didn't do chemical products until I was much older. So again, there are ways to look as you want to look. It's about having the information to know what is the safest alternative.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. It's such an important conversation. We really appreciate you being here. We should say that we have a link on our website that allows you to search for the individual beauty products that you use if you'd like to know more about what's in them. But Dr. Kim Barbell Johnson, Dr. Lorraine Brown, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Coming up next, a century-old building takes on new life in Jacksonville's historic East Side. Welcome back. Well, the transformation of Jacksonville's historic Union Terminal Warehouse is an urban revitalization project that advocates hope will drive investment and development on the East Side. Joining me to discuss it, I am joined by Ryan Aiken, partner and developing manager at Columbia Ventures. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Suzanne Pickett, CEO of Historic Eastside Community Development Corporation. Good morning, Suzanne.
Good morning. Thank you, Ann.
And Travis Williams, Chief Operating Officer of Lift Jacks. Welcome.
Hey, good morning.
So if you could just start us off and orient us a little bit, Ryan, about this project? Because as you said, a lot of people drive past it all the time, but they may not know the building that we're talking about. So it's on Union Street.
Yeah, it's on Union Street. If you're coming from Arlington into the city along the Matthews Bridge, it's on your right just as before you come into downtown. It was kind of a peach color with some red corrugated metal windows for a really long time, and then people have been coming by for the past couple of years have been seeing the transformation occurring real time before their eyes. Now the building's painted white with the black windows that are historic replica windows. And then as folks are coming off 95 into Union Street into the city, if they look straight ahead, they'll see the giant water tower, red water tower on the top that has the letters UTW for Union Terminal Warehouse, which is a historic name of the building. So it's a sort of an iconic building in Jacksonville, and it's lived many lives over the past century, and we've taken it into the next century.
And so the new life of this building is it's a residential space, it's a workspace, it has a lot of amenities, it's got a very cool aesthetic. Can you just sort of describe? We're showing some pictures, I think, of the renovation that people who are watching our live stream can see, but tell us a little bit about what you were going for in the design and the amenities that it offers.
Sure. Yeah, we undertook a historic renovation, adaptive reuse project. So, we really leaned into the industrial aesthetic that was already there. It's an irreplicable building. You can't start from scratch and rebuild this place with all the history and the stories and the character that it has in it. So, rather than trying to paint over that and sort of hide it, we really embraced it and leaned into it. And those that come and tour really appreciate that, it seems, and really desire that. It's a place that's inspiring to be in. The building itself has 228 apartments in it. So you could think of an apartment community with residents that are living in studios, 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartments. And then it also has a lot of workspace in it, which is not something that everyone will see when they drive by. This workspace is called Workhouse, which is a blend of workspace and warehouse. It's an old industrial warehouse with workspace in it. And there are 43 of those small business spaces for entrepreneurs. If your listener is a graphic designer, a real estate agent, an attorney, a lawyer, an artist, a photographer, these are spaces for small businesses to come and inhabit and form an ecosystem. And then in the basement, there are, there's actually a basement. There are 11 sort of light industrial spaces for the listeners that are of the maker variety. Maybe they're artists or craftspeople, content creators, and what have you.
Yeah. And so this is a newly renovated and newly leasing. But Suzanne, this is a building that has been on the east side for a long time. And it's one that you actually occupied yourself for a while.
I did. I occupied the space for 5 years as an artist and met wonderful other artists and makers who some had occupied that space for over 3 decades in the Union Terminal Warehouse. So very excited about the revitalization of it. Welcoming creatives and businesses back, as Ryan says, and just excited about the fusing of new residents to the Union Terminal to the residents of Eastside.
And this is a historic property with that designation. It also got some incentives to help kind of realize this project. How central is this redevelopment to kind of the overall efforts to redevelop and revitalize the East Side?
So this is a great addition to our mixed income housing initiative in the East Side to fuse, again, current housing, current opportunities, legacy residents with new residents in the neighborhood.
Okay. So Travis, what about this was easy? What about this was difficult? I mean, what were some of the challenges to getting this project off the ground?
Well, I'll let Ryan speak to maybe some of the particular challenges that he had. But I would say from our lens, the challenges with these projects historically are people see them as a sign of new things to come, and that new doesn't necessarily include those who've been there. I think in development, we talk about projects normally consider the come theirs, not the been theirs. And so generally these projects speak to that. But our experience has been totally different from day one, really, connecting with Ryan and the team at Columbia. The challenge has just been how do we do more together? It's not doing anything, but what are the symbolic ways that we can show the community that this new and shiny object does not mean that it's not for you. It can be for you too. You can come back to the East Side with your business and be housed in the East Side. maybe you moved away and you want to move back. This can be where you live. And so those symbolic things, but then also the action. And so whether it's a hard hat tour that we took 2 years ago with businesses in the neighborhood, so they got a very early experience with the building to feel like, hey, I know this building. I know what's happening with it. It's not this new thing happening over there that we don't know about. And that intentionality and getting more people to know about it, that was the challenge, was how do we get more people to know about this building? And how do we make sure that the narrative is that this building is a part of this neighborhood, and it's an addition to the neighborhood. And so that's been a great, great experience.
And like Suzanne, you also have a personal connection to this building. Can
Yeah.
you tell us about that?
Yeah, like many folks, who grew up in the neighborhood, I'm a fourth generation East Sider, so my family's called the neighborhood home for 100 years. And I recently learned, and this isn't a story I grew up with, my aunt stays about a block away from the building, and she's one of my grandparents' oldest child. And she said, yeah, your great grandfather worked in that building in maybe the 40s or 50s, I believe. She wasn't 100% sure, but there was a post office that used to be there, and he was employed there. He lived at the corner of Jesse and Sparing Street, so maybe a 4-block walk. And so all those stories are there with a lot of legacy East Siders, and it's great to see this new life being breathed into the building. And now we get a chance to write our own stories and our interaction, and maybe our grandkids will learn about as well how we interacted with the building.
I mean, we should say there's a lot of historic buildings that haven't been so fortunate in Jacksonville, that haven't had a plan for revitalization and ultimately have just been taken down. Was this building ever at risk of that fate, or was it?
Sure, I can speak to that. And every building undergoes a life cycle, if you will. Just the physical environment does, and eventually gravity takes its toll, and nature takes its toll, and all of those things. And buildings, need repairs and maintenance. There's a lot of concrete restoration just to the structure of the building to sort of rehab it for the next 100 years. So that's a definite and real possibility with any old building. From an environmental perspective, they say the most sustainable building is the one that already exists. So, there's a lot of embedded carbon in there. There's a lot of, people's sweat equity in there to create a place like this. And so we want to keep it going. But it takes financial tools. It takes an environment, partners, and perseverance are kind of three things that come to mind for me. And Jacksonville has been certainly a welcoming environment to try to execute a project like this, to the point of contributing funds to the Downtown Preservation and Revitalization Program that was created by the Downtown Investment Authority to spark efforts just like this, where an old building that needs additional financial incentives and help to become a reality receives those and then puts those buildings back into productive use. That's a real possibility, and it does happen all the time. Absent the environment and then the great partners, and partners is community partners like I'm sitting with here today. It's the city government, City of Jacksonville, and the Downtown Investment Authority, and the City Council. It's design partners, construction partners, leasing partners, the whole group of people that bring it together. And there's thousands of people that have been involved, when you think through all the supply chain and every person at a desk that's worked on this.
And this wasn't an inexpensive project. My understanding, it was about $72 million to do this overhaul.
That's right.
But as you say, enabled by some incentives from DIA and some state tax credits.
There's really incentives at the federal, state, and local level in the project. There are federal historic tax credits in the project, with a historic tax credit equity investor in the deal. There are brownfields tax credits, which are through the state of Florida for cleaning up a site that has old railroad tracks and the remnants of that, and the environmental concerns that come with it. There is a local real estate tax exemption that comes with it, the building being a local landmark that's also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And then there's funding through the Downtown Investment Authority, the Downtown Preservation and Revitalization Program. And in addition to that, this project is actually the largest by square footage historic tax credit project in the state of Florida since the inception of the program in the 1970s. And it is the first historic tax credit project in a federally designated opportunity zone, which are qualified census tracts.
Suzanne, we've got just a little under a minute left, but could you just say kind of how you're going to measure success when looking at this project going forward?
So again, with our initiative in the revitalization of East Side, I want to mention that the Union Terminal is also now on our Main Street. We have a Florida Avenue Main Street. We're the only one in Jacksonville. A. Philip Randolph Boulevard and Union Street now is a Main Street. So we measure success, again, very importantly, by the amount of new residents that come in and the development. But in our with gentrification strategy, just how many legacy residents are still able to stay in the community and be a part of this wonderful work. So the Union Terminal
With gentrification,
with
is the new term.
gentrification,
Yeah.
yes. Columbia Ventures Partnership is a great example of how you can have a major development, as Travis alluded to, a major development into the community that works with the community, that's there for the community while welcoming new residents.
Well, there is leasing information if anybody is interested. It's at utwjax.com. Ryan Aiken, Suzanne Pickett, Travis Williams, thank you all so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank
Congrats
you,
on the
Ann.
new project.
Thank you,
you,
guys.
Ann.
Thank you, Ann.
All right. Up next, a self-taught artist creates waves with her mini artworks.
DuPont Counseling Group is a team of therapists, psychiatrists, and counselors available to help with life's mental health challenges. Everyone needs help sometimes. More information can be found at jacksonvillecounseling.org.
The Jacksonville Music Experience presents psychedelic rock band Levitation Room, performing live on the WJCT soundstage on Saturday, March 29th at 7 p.m. Tickets and more information at jacksmusic.org/JME events.
A new TV comedy series called The Studio is about a freshly appointed movie studio head trying to keep the company afloat as Hollywood changes around him. The show includes Martin Scorsese, Zoe Kravitz, and Ice Cube playing versions of themselves. On the next Fresh Air, we talk to the co-creator and star of The Studio, Seth Rogen. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Emily Mester's father went to Costco every Sunday. He bought everything he could, whether he needed it or not.
I think those piles were kind of the money made flesh.
Yeah.
His spending habits tend towards physical objects and a lot of physical objects. Yeah, like a physical manifestation of, having enough.
A daughter, a father, and a family struggle with American bulk. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Voice of America's first broadcast was in German in 1942, an effort to counter Nazi propaganda. The U.S. state-run media organization grew from there to reach hundreds of millions of people in nearly 50 languages worldwide, until this weekend, when President Trump abruptly shut down the service, the dismantling of VOA. That's next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, some of her artwork may be small, but her talent and use of color is absolutely king size. Here to tell us about it and her inspiration is Teresa Cook, the artist behind Teresa Cook Art. Good morning, Teresa.
Hey, how you doing?
Thank you for being here. We should say your art has so inspired our producer that she's actually signed up, Stacy, for one of your upcoming classes.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, how did you first get interested in art? You primarily work in watercolor?
Yes, I've been working in watercolor since 2012.
Mhm.
So I primarily mainly got into that based off the fact that I just wanted to do something different. And I was in college and I wanted to, the courses were all like in acrylic and oils. And I was clearly annoyed with it, but I always wanted to do watercolor. So I started my last year of college. I told my graduating professor, I was like, I want to do watercolor. And she's like, okay, well, like whatever you do, like we're going to figure out different ways or whatever the case may be, but make it make sense and you can develop and grow from it. And I did a study abroad with her. And that's when I started doing like my little miniatures at that time. And then that's when I really like fell in love with watercolor, like even more than what I thought. I had like all these like watercolor books from like when I was a kid and stuff, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do then. Yeah.
So interesting. For people who are watching our live stream, we're showing some of your watercolors. And as you say, some of them are quite small,
Right.
very precise. I think most of our experience, like as children with watercolors, was deeply unsatisfying.
Right.
You kind of have this messy, it's very hard to control.
Right.
What was it about the actual, medium that appealed to you?
Well, with watercolor, what I always tell people, like even in my adult classes, I tell them like watercolor was not a medium that was given to us as kids to like really learn from. It was kind of like, oh, this is something we can clean up. We don't have to worry about anything. So when we become adults, like the mediums that we're using as adults are acrylics and oils because that's what we're taught to use. In actuality, watercolor wasn't a medium that was taught to use as an adult. So I've made it my job to like teach adults how to actually use the medium, not think of it as like a Crayola project, but think of it more of like how you can really use the medium to create from it. So, and I think is all people think is about control, but the paint is only going to go where you put water at. It's never going to go where you don't put anything at. So once you learn the consistency of how much water and how much pigment you use is easier at that point. But you're going to struggle with when you think like, oh, like I don't see it being anything else or like trying to make it a certain type of way. And then I always try to tell people like they want to make a masterpiece like really, really quickly after like one day of painting. And it is, that's unrealistic. You have to put the time into it, and learn how to use it. And that's really what I did. I started out doing like these blobs of watercolors, and I would like tape them out like in a square format. And I started doing all these blobs, and I've sold all of them. They're like in people's houses right now. And that was something that I did to learn techniques that they have, for watercolor. Like the technique we're going to use this weekend was just a wet and wet method. So I learned through all of those like different techniques, and then I just started figuring out ways to make it, I guess, make sense or whatever, just from learning from it. But yeah, that's pretty much like it's just taking the time out to learn it.
And the result is with the watercolors, it's very luminous. Kind
Right.
of the paint effect is just a very vibrant, but almost like a glow about it when you
Right.
have that on paper. So you are offering a class this weekend, a challenge of sorts where people can select a literary landscape that
Right.
really speaks to them.
Right.
Tell us about kind of what you're asking people to come to this with.
Well, and this is more like for the book readers, is of connecting the art of like connecting the colors to the books that you read. So like Pride and Prejudice, like you would use like more pastelist colors, and then you would have, or even like Annie and the Green Gables too. You can use that concept of like the rolling hills and the pinks and blues in the background of the sky and things like that, and then we're just gonna blend them all together, so that way you can actually create something instead of thinking like, what am I doing, And the wet and wet method, which is very easy to do because basically like you're working with wet and wet is basically like where you're putting color down, and then the next color that you put to it, how it kind of interacts with each other alone. So as long as it's wet, it'll work. And then the cool thing about watercolor, it does dry pretty quickly. So then you're able to put layers on top and see those layers. And I love doing it. That's like my favorite thing about watercolor is like the layers that you see below it.
Yeah. And so this event is actually going to be at Happy Medium Books and Cafe.
Mm-hmm.
Is there still room available? Are people?
Yes, it's still room available. I think it's like maybe 6 spaces left. So it's still room available, which I'm excited about that because I was like, I hope it's still like space left like when I come when I come. But I love the space and I love going into the space. I have my prints on display at Dana's as well. And I also have like a large painting that I've done where you can there's a magnifying glass because I did this concept that was at the Ritz Theater. It was called See Jacksonville, and it was my large paintings with tiny miniature art like painted inside of it because I wanted to like bring the two together. So yeah.
All right. Well, Teresa Cook, thanks so much for being here. You can sign up online and find more information at Happy Medium Books Cafe. Thanks for being here, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, and thank you for listening. That's our program. Join us tomorrow when we discuss Florida's so-called free kill law, advocating for changes to a bill that people say currently gives a pass to bad doctors. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com.
Liberty Life, the pro-military paper and audio articles from Kings Bay to Camp Blanding. Serves Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, and Marines. Liberty Life is available wherever the military, veterans, and their families gather. Online at libertylifemedia.com.
This is WJCT News.